Now in this lesson we'll be creating wall jump functionality. So let's think of implementing wall jumps as a programmer should. First, when you collide with a wall, you shouldn't be grounded, and the script should check if the player is colliding or grabbing onto the wall. If the player is colliding onto the wall, then you can wall jump. So we're going to create a bool variable to check if we can wall jump, and when we can wall jump and we press on the spacebar, the player jumps. Alright, so now let's go to the player controller and implement that. Alright, so first of all, right here, I'm just going to create a new region. So basically, regions are really nice and effective ways to tidy up your code. I'm going to call it wall jump. I'm going to end it here. Now, first of all, let's check if we can grab. So a bool can grab. So to check if we can grab the wall. Another bool, call it is grabbing. A public float, we'll call it the wall jump radius for the overlap circles radius. And another public transform wall jump check pause. Alright, so going here, I just created the region, call it wall jump in the update function. So right here, let's set can grab to equal physics2d dot overlap circle, and basically set its position to, what did we call it? Wall jump check pause dot position, and the wall jump radius. And for the layer mask, I'm just going to use what is ground. So whatever is ground, we can actually use it again for wall jumping if we're colliding with it as a wall. If you don't understand how this line of code works and what it basically means, then go to the lesson where I talk about implementing jumping. It's basically the same overlap circle method, but with different parameters. Alright, so now in the wall jumping section right here, we're going to set is grabbing to equal false. So is grabbing is always false. But if we're not grounded, so if we're not grounded and we can grab, then we're just gonna set an if statement to check our scale. So our scale is not actually 1, so we want to check it. So we want to clamp it to actually be either -1 or 1. So it's actually 0.7, I think. So let's just create a float clamped scale equal mathf dot clamp. Clamp the transform dot local scale dot x, only the x scale, from the minimum -1 to 1. Now I'm actually recording this again from the future, and I actually made a mistake here. My apologies, you can't clamp the x-axis scale here to 1, because mine is already less than 1, it's 0.7. So instead, just rename it to scale for short, rename the float variable to scale for short, and type in transform.localscale.x. My apologies again. So basically, clamped scale is if it's bigger than 0, so it's 1, and then x input is also bigger than 0, so we're basically going in the right direction. We're basically sticking to the right direction. So if the wall is facing left, then we can collide with it on the right direction. Or another bracket, clamped scale is less than 0, and then at the same time, x input is less than 0. So if that's happening, then we can actually grab. So is grabbing equals to true. And whenever we press on the space bar, if input dot get key down key code dot space. So when we press on the space bar while we're grabbing, we want to jump right here. But in the update section, when we are grabbing, so whenever is grabbing is true. So what we actually want to happen is whenever we're grabbing, we want to slowly fall down. So we don't want to fall down normally. So we actually have a window of time before we fall down. So I actually have a window of time to jump before we fall down completely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two floats right here. I'm going to create a float, call it initial gravity scale, another public float, but this one I'm gonna call it wall jump gravity. So this is our initial gravity scale. Whenever we spawn in, whenever we start the game, we'll take the gravity's current scale. So we'll take the rb.gravity scale and then just store it in a float value called initial gravity scale. So whenever it's changed, we can actually go back to the initial gravity scale. In the start method, I'm going to type in initial gravity scale to equal rb.gravity scale. So if is grabbing RB's gravity scale, so the gravity scale is equal to wall jump gravity, and the velocity and the RB dot velocity is equal to vector2.0. So in the velocity standpoint, in the speed standpoint, we're actually not adding any speed. We're keeping the speed 0. So else if we're not grabbing, we just want to keep the gravity scale. So rb.gravity scale equal to initial gravity scale. Awesome. So if our gravity scale at first when starting the game was 3 or 4 was 3, then we can go back to the initial gravity scale because it was stored at the start of the game. It was stored right here at the start of the game. Now let's go back to this little line right here. So if we are pressing on the space bar, then what we're going to do is we're going to add RB velocity to equal new vector2 velocity. I'm going to set an x input times, we want the x's current input. So if we're pressing on the left direction, we want to jump in the right direction. So whatever is opposite to the x input times a float. So you can actually input in the jump float force, or you can make another public float to be the wall jumps force and then add it over there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a separate float for the wall jumps force. So public float wall jump force on the x axis, and I'm going to create one again, wall jump force on the y axis. Now we can go back here and then set wall jump force on the x, and then another one, wall jump force y, and then reset RB's gravity scale, RB.gravity scale to equal initial gravity, and you're gonna set is grabbing to equal false, so we can stop grabbing. So this is just to reset the gravity scale, and this is just to reset that we're not grabbing. So we've actually jumped. So basically, is grabbing is equal to false. Now if we go back, now by doing that, the player will actually jump, but we want to add one more functionality. So we actually want to take away the player's control while he's double jumping. So there's a little window of 0.2 seconds that the player will not actually control anything. You can actually control it and make it longer or shorter, depending on what you prefer. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to create a timer. And this timer from the start of our wall jump will actually start and it'll keep on decreasing in the update function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way up here and I'm going to set timer. I'm going to type in public float. I'm going to set start wall jump timer. I'm going to set another one, call it wall jump timer. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right here to the movement. So we're just going to open this movement section right here. We're going to take this little piece of movement right here. We're going to cut it and we're going to create an if statement. So if wall jump timer is less than or equal to 0, then you can move. So you can check actually for X input and you can actually move. Else, if it hasn't happened yet, else just decrease wall jump timer with time. Time.delta time. So this is basically a timer. If wall jump timer is less than or equal to 0, you can actually move and do all the things. If it's not, well, decrease it until it reaches 0. So this is basically just a loop. But we've actually not set when will wall jump timer be more than 0. So that's where the timer functionality pops up. So wall jump timer is equal to start wall jump timer. Awesome. Now let's save. Let's go back. Alright, so going back to the Unity editor, I just added a box, colored it something like red. a red color, and set the ordinal layer for it to 3, and set its layer to ground. Awesome. Now let's go back to the player, and let's just deselect everything else. In the wall jump check pause, what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to make another transform position, so another game object, another empty game object, and we're going to call this wall jump check wall jump pause. And we're going to take this wall jump pause, and I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it here. This what I actually want to do is I want to also draw another sphere. So gizmos.draw sphere, and I'm going to set it as wall jump check pause dot position, and the wall jump radius. Now I'm going to set the player to be something like 0.5, maybe 0.2. Awesome. So 0.2 works just fine. And the wall jump gravity, maybe set it as 0.3. The wall jump force X, I'm going to set it to something like 20. And on the force Y, I'm going to set it to 20. I'm going to set the wall jump timer to something like 0.3. So to take away the movement controls for 0.3 seconds after we wall jump. So now let's save and play. I'm just going to set this one to something like 10 and 10. Now if we do play again. Alright, so I just removed the flip function that was right here. And now it works perfectly without any glitches.